I would like to welcome you all to this program on COVID-19 and social protection program in Bangladesh. I think this is something, we all would agree that this is something very topical and given the current situation. And for this, SANEM is actually hosting a series of events, what we call SANEM Sangjog. And we have been hosting issues on health sector, on youth, on education, on different other areas. And then and we found that this is an area where we should also have a program like this. And we are glad to have Professor Bozlo Khandokar, the chairman of SANEM, to make a presentation today. And I'm also very much glad to have some distinguished people with us, especially Mr. Tomu Hozumi, UNICEF representative Bangladesh. As a special guest, I welcome you, Mr. Hozumi. And we also have with us Mr. Mohammad Aizul Islam, Additional Secretary, Finance Division, Minister of Finance, as the panelist. And we also have two other panelists, Ms. Anika Rahman, Senior Social Protection Economist, the World Bank, and also Dr. Samahak Bidisha, Research Director, SANEM, and Professor Department of Economics, University of Dhaka. Unfortunately, Dr. S.M. Zulfikar Ali, a Senior Research Fellow, BIDS, was also supposed to be one of the panelists, but he could not join us because of his some sudden commitment, a family commitment. So I thought that to just give a little bit of background about the kind of issues we'll be dealing today or discussing today. We all know that in countries like Bangladesh, one of the biggest challenges is that when you talk about poverty and vulnerability, the conventional measures sometimes it's actually failed to identify the poor people. And that's why the poverty reduction programs in general, many through these kind of conventional poverty reduction programs, many of these poor and vulnerable people, they may be left out. So for that reason, social protection programs are very much intended to complement the poverty reduction programs through which this left out population can be brought under their coverage. So that's why even if in normal time, we talk quite a lot about the importance of the social protection program to think about and to address the challenges of the left out population. But I'm quite sure under this COVID-19 situation, the current crisis, the importance of social protection program has become more relevant. So it is imperative that an effective designing of social protection system takes into account a comprehensive understanding of the poverty and vulnerability situation of a country. And for this, while we talk about this COVID-19 situation, we must have and we should have a better understanding of the poverty and vulnerability situation of our country. And I think here also I would request and I would also seek the kind of from the of course from the presentation, keynote presentation, as is from the panel discussion, we'd like to know the kind of our understanding of the poverty and vulnerability situation in Bangladesh. So though country experiences vary, we know that the social protection programs in general covers the policies and programs designed to reduce poverty and vulnerability through labor market interventions or many other different kinds of interventions for the efficient functioning of labor market or other related institutions. So interventions related to social insurance to reduce people's exposure to risk, and social assistance interventions to enhance people's capacity to manage economic and social vulnerabilities. I think this is extremely important in the context of COVID-19 now, what we are observing at this moment. I also think that I'm quite sure that in the presentation as well as in the panel discussion, these issues will come very much, and this will be discussed. That there are three aspects, major aspects, when you talk about the social protection under challenges of social protection under COVID-19. One is, of course, what proportion of the GDP the government is spending on social protection. And here we see that actually we are struggling in Bangladesh, and the kind of the spending from the government side on the social protection, whether this is enough, or what areas we need to expand, and what is the kind of capacity of the government. That is the second point. What is the kind of capacity of the government to expand the social protection program, especially financing the social protection program? And the third point is the kind of approaches to social protection program. We know that there are debates whether social protection should be universal or targeted, or we should go for the cash assistance program or in-kind program, or whether we should take into account the kind of life cycle perspective, or whether net income should be considered while determining a needy population, or the capabilities approach should be undertaken. So I think all these things have become more and more important while we are actually addressing, or we are going through the crisis of COVID-19, and as well as we are talking about how to get rid of this crisis, and in the kind of post-crisis period, what should be the programs and policies targeting, especially under social protection programs. So with this kind of very brief introduction, I would like to now invite Dr. Bozlo Khandekar, who is the chairman of SANEM, and Professor Department of Economics, University of Dhaka, to make his presentation. So Bozlo bhai, you have around 20 minutes.
20 minutes? Okay. Thank you, Selim. And also, good evening to everyone. And special thanks to Tomu Hazumi, UNICEF representative in Bangladesh, and distinguished panelists, including Mr. Azir Alam, who is also my class friend. We passed Dhaka. We actually was in the same department, same year. He's now the Additional Secretary of Finance Division, also looks after the social protection system there. And also Anika Rahman, who is the senior economist at the World Bank. But I like to take this opportunity to also express my condolence to all people in Bangladesh who died because of COVID-19, and also to Rubaba Anwar, who was our colleague, worked at the World Bank. And my condolence to the World Bank colleagues and also to her family. I have personally expressed my condolence to his husband and family also. So with that, I'd like to start. I think I will try to upload my PowerPoint presentation. So I have basically three parts for this presentation. In part A, I need to show the situation before COVID-19 and also talk about few issues with respect to social protection system in Bangladesh. In part B, I like to focus on the impacts of COVID-19 and what were the responses in terms of social protection, or the overall kind of responses that we are seeing. And part C, I like to have some conclusion and also provide some recommendation in the context of COVID-19, as well as what Bangladesh should do in near future, I think within the domain of next 5-year plan. Okay, so before COVID-19, the story was quite rosy in the context.
See the presentation. Did you start sharing the presentation?
Okay. Sorry, Salim. I just let me go back, then try to see. Can you see now?
Yes, the presentation. If you choose the PowerPoint file. Yes, and excellent.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we did not miss much. So the before COVID-19 situation was quite rosy. I have put some key statistics, not all statistics, like there are several statistics that we can put. But according to the government official data and key indicator, we have been doing quite nice and on the path of doing great. GDP growth was expected to be 8.2%. We always have very low unemployment, and the unemployment could have been 3.7%, and further reduction in poverty from 24.3% to 18.9%, the moderate poverty, and extreme poverty to 9.4%. And I am also referring to few issues, just one or two issues, and there were other concerns, but I just flagged 2 or 3 issues concerned which are related to social protection. One, that the Gini coefficient or the inequality in Bangladesh is rising, has been rising. And if you look at the left-hand graph from 1995 to 2016, almost over two decades, it has been remained around 33%. So this is consumption Gini. If we look at the income Gini is even higher, almost 16 percentage point higher than the consumption Gini. In 2016, it was 0.486 consumption Gini. But according to an IMF uh, working paper on inequality hangover, Grigoli and Robsell in 2017 actually argued that if the Gini coefficient or the inequality is over 2.7, it will hurt growth because of concentration of wealth in few hands, and also it also curtail the resources to the lower bottom of the people. So it's a concern, and this can be handled quite nicely with social protection, and we have seen the impacts of social protection all over the world in terms of reducing inequality. On the right-hand side, I'm putting a graph possibly for the first time in Bangladesh, is that we know every society, there are two groups, children 0 to 17 ages and elderly 65 do not earn any income normally, usually, but they have to consume to live. So the gap between their consumption and income is known as life cycle deficit according to national transfer accounts, which is popularized by East West Center, University of California, Berkeley, and also supported by UN system. And so if you see the last, this life cycle deficit of both of these two groups are rising. And the life cycle deficit of children is significantly higher than the life cycle deficit of elderly because of the size. But also another concern is that how much of that deficit is actually supported by public transfer? Very few. If you look at for the children, it is only 11% in 2020. It includes all the social protection transfer to the children, also education budget and other budgets. So considering all those things, we found that the transfer to children is very small, 11%. It is better, it is higher for elderly because it includes the public sector pension, but still only 33% or 1/3 of their deficit is financed from public sector. So they rely on predominantly on the private transfer to cover their gap. And it has significant implication on the livelihood, mortality, as well as nutrition and productivity of future generation. Some features related to Bangladesh social protection system. Allocation, according to again official data, is range between 2.2 to 2.9% of GDP, which is not small compared to other countries of this region. And we have been, according to the official statistics, the coverage is around 34% in 2018. I think I found that in 2019 it was almost 39%, which is slightly higher than quite significantly higher than the number of poor that we are actually having, 24%, but maybe smaller than the vulnerable groups, which are around 50-55% in Bangladesh. The transfer amounts range between, normally in most cases, 500 taka to 800 taka per month. Other issue that we see is that a good initiative by government is to transfer money through the digital infrastructure, which we call G2P coverage, which is currently is covering, if I'm not wrong, 6.7% of total allocation of SP allocation. Still, we have large number of programs, 30 or 140 program, which is, difficult to coordinate, but still we could not actually reduce the number of programs, although this was one of the major recommendations of National Social Security Strategy in 2015. Some concern. One concern is that exclusion error is still very high, 70%. What does it mean? Mean that if I target 100 poor for the program, we could only reach 30 poor correctly. So 70 of the beneficiary, we are not being able to reach with the current system that we have. So this is the major concern. Even if we are covering 34% of the population, we hardly could reach the poor, which is the major target for this program. There are mismatch between demography and social spending. Example, like for children, 0 to 5 constitute 9% of the population, receiving only 2% of SP budget. Elderly constituting 8% of the population, but receiving 72% of the SP budget. So if we exclude the public pension, it will be 49%. Again, there are also a discrepancy between urban and rural coverage. Very low coverage for the urban citizen, 4% only against 47% for the rural citizen. And urban coverage is also lower than the urban poverty rate. 11% coverage for the urban area against almost 19% urban poverty according to 2016 data. Rural coverage is higher than the rural poverty, 35% against rural poverty of 26.4%. I think we all agree that despite all those transfer, the transfer amount according to the poor and the beneficiary still inadequate according to the need. I have calculated the average transfer amount in 2020 was around 600 taka per person, which is roughly around 33% or 30% of the poverty line, if we consider that one. So considering that we are still not providing enough money through the system. I think another concern is that actually how much money we are actually able to send to or able to allocate for the deserving beneficiary, which are poor and vulnerable. My calculation that if we exclude the civil servant pension, which is a social insurance scheme, and also some other like the interest payment of national savings certificate, some subsidies, the amount that we actually allocate for the poor and vulnerable comes to 1.5 to 1.7% of GDP, not 3% or 2.9% that we are claiming in that way. So that's some concern for the social protection system. So everything was there before around December 2019. Then came COVID-19, and the impacts are large, huge. And the only some issue is that it's still unfolding. Today we hear Boris Johnson was saying that he thinks that there's a second wave is coming in Europe. We are seeing resurgence of cases in China. And for the US, we don't know whether it is the extension of the first wave or the second wave. So still unfolding, and we are actually living in a very uncertain situation, and we don't know what is coming in the next quarter and after 2020 and 2021. So obviously, because of that, the growth calculation will vary, and we see a lot of difference in growth calculation because people are assuming different kinds of impacts on the channels, like the export growth, what will be the impact of export, remittances, lockdown effect, and all those things. And so we're seeing, like I was involved in a work with UNICEF, and we're seeing we consider two cases, low case, high case, and World Bank and other. So the growth rate may be negative, could be negative for this year or the next year also, or it could be very close to 1. While government of Bangladesh is more optimistic, they're saying that it could be 5% for this year and 8.2% next year, which I think is a very optimistic one. But leaving that aside, if we consider the two cases, we'll find that the unemployment impacts will be 6.2% compared to 3.7% in the low case, and or around 12% in the case of high case. DIDS in a survey found that 13%. SANEM also found large impact on unemployment. The poverty impact should be very high, as Selim was saying, and everybody should acknowledge or agree that the poverty rate, if in the low case 4% GDP, it will be 24.1%, and in the high case, if it is negative 3%, it will be 42.2%. And in the World Bank, while commenting on South Asia poverty impact, they say that all the gains in poverty that we have achieved over the last 2-3 decades could be lost within one single stroke, and which is not. I think that is not an understatement. It's a real statement that we should be carefully thought through. On the top right-hand side, we also try to see the poverty impact at the household level by different age group. And we found that the poverty impact would be much higher for the children 0 to 5, 6 to 9, and also elderly, which also we found that their life cycle deficit has been rising. So these are also quite concerning case. In the case of just with 4% GDP growth, children poverty will rise by 32% compared to the pre-COVID situation. And in the case of high case, it will be 55%. Similarly with the elderly, and then it will be 34%. So these are the poverty impact at the household level. Okay, and on the final, on the lower right-hand side, the life cycle deficit will be rising. Obviously, we see that it jumps in the case of both in the case of children and also elderly. But if we don't put money through public system, their deficit, I mean, how they're going to actually cover the extra deficit is a big concern for them, and it will have some implication on their mortality, nutrition intake, I mean, future productivity, and all those are concerned. Okay. Now, the response around the world has been tremendous. There has been a lot of response to fight the COVID, or actually save life and livelihood. And some of that are like there has been vertical expansion by increasing the transfer value, and also horizontal expansion in terms of number of people has been included into the program, even if they're temporary. And also in some cases, they have been introduced new programs. Okay. Now, interesting development, interesting proposal came from IMF, World Bank, and UN. I mean, IMF, I mean, interesting to see that the IMF has been proposing that there could be universal transfer in the South Asia because of the low coverage and low adequacy, even if that is a temporary, even if it's for a 3-month, 6-month program. But they are saying that it is difficult to actually target people, I mean, beneficiary at this point. So why not go for a universal program? Similarly, the director of social protection at the World Bank is actually also argued for universal social protection entitlement, because there are lots of missing middle in these countries. If you see, I mean, I will show later that there are plenty of missing middle always missed out from the social protection system, either through social assistance and insurance in South Asia. Even a system which is always supported universal transfer is also called for, I mean, like universal transfer, both from a human rights perspective and SDG perspective. Now, also interesting development is that most countries has been taking advantage of digital infrastructure to, I mean, like, sending payment, I mean, like using the cash transfer program because through registration as well as payment. And then also, it is interesting to see that I know that the rich country is spending a lot, like the rich country global, according to the IMF, same report found that the rich G7 countries spending around, so far, 5.9% of GDP in this kind of support. We don't expect that kind of support in our country because of problem of resource allocation. But overall, in Asia, the social protection response has been muted. I mean, the allocation was between 0.2% to 8% of GDP. Now, these were, obviously, these were not enough compared to the size of crisis that we are seeing. Now, as a rule of thumb, it is interesting to see that Martin Rebellion in 2020 in a blog, he argued that as a rule of thumb, the near-term fiscal injection of transfer less than 2% of GDP should be judged inadequate. So what is his point? His point is that please try to put money at least equal to 2% of GDP. Whether it can, whether the countries will be able to do it, like to see. But this is a message that he wants to give the South. I mean, most of the government. Okay. Now there was a survey by World Bank and also UNICEF and Gentilini et al. They have surveyed the social protection responses in different countries. I mean, they surveyed almost 130, 173, 181 countries, and they found that the social protection, social assistance dominate over social assistance, and the non-contributive program covered 60% of the global responses. On the right-hand side, I have showed these. They are reproduced their summary is that 45 countries actually go for vertical expansion with 63 measure. In 10 countries with 13 measure, they went for both horizontal and vertical expansion, meaning that the coverage increase, also the transfer payment increase. In 41 countries, adopted 62 measure in terms of administrative adaptation, meaning that the conditionality has been waived, and also you can do remote application, those kind of things. And most popular one or most used one was horizontal expansion, 157 country, more than 300 measures they have taken in this one. So it gives us that at the global level, the response were tremendous, and both in terms of coverage and both in terms of allocation. Now let's see. The Bangladesh government is also responded generously. Now look at the Bangladesh social protection system. This is what I'm saying, that we are covering the bottom poor with the social assistance tax finance, but still the problem is it doesn't mean that we are covering them perfectly. There's a huge extortion problem. And on the top, I mean, the rich and others can support themselves with their savings and also public pension. But there are this missing middle, which is almost 40 to 50%. They have no coverage, no social insurance, no social assistance. And this is the group actually has been suffering most in this kind of crisis. And that's what the World Bank was referring and others were referring. Okay. Now coming to the GOB stimulus, I mean, according to our knowledge, I might be wrong. I mean, others can confirm me, correct me. The 19th stimulus package worth over 10 billion, which almost 3.7% of GDP, which is quite generous. But the same one issue was that it will be mainly channeled through the banking system and the monetary system, not a fiscal transfer. And we know that in this kind of transfer, the Keynesian and fiscal type of instrument is more effective one. What are the specific SP responses? 5,000 crore taka wage subsidy given to RMG worker and other workers, which I think worked well. Government also wanted to give one-time transfer to household, 2,400 taka as a social assistance. There was also food, other voucher in-kind transfer, like the rice price were, dropped from 30 taka per kg to 5 taka per kg and was transferred through the OMS system. Now, this, according to my calculation, this amounts only 15% of the population. And given the size of the crisis and the prolonged nature of the crisis, I think the one-time payment is not enough to, for this kind of crisis. So we need to go beyond this one. Again, the case, what we found from the newspaper and other sources is that the number two, scheme two, already have problem in terms. So only 14 lakh people receive money because there are problem in terms of other lists where there were duplication errors, and they are going to re-verification. And we still don't know what's happening to that list. We believe the progress is small, and we have problem with this one. Given this one, I like to come to my last slide with conclusion and recommendation. The conclusion is that the fiscal response, basically social protection response in Bangladesh, has been so far been weak and muted compared to the need that we have. The missing middle, 50%, also needs support. We cannot actually abandon them. We need to include them, this one. Following the argument of Martin Rebellion, we should go for a rapid, bold, broad-based and forward-looking response in terms of social protection. I think this will not only save life, but it will also support livelihood and boosting domestic effective demand and domestic economic growth, which is also critically needed at this point. Now, I also believe that every crisis also gives you some opportunity. And this is an opportunity we can learn from that, and we can try to correct our system so that the next crisis we can deal much better. So what are my suggestion? Our suggestion is that prepare a robust database using national household data system, which is unfortunately still not ready. Information management system linking with NID and other relevant digital indicator. And I think we should do it in fiscal year 2021. Should not spend, waste any time. In this coverage, if possible, temporary, universal, as IMF and other advocated. And for the longer term, I think we should have a universal child grant and universal pension, social pension, old age system. Government has already indicated that by 2025, every elderly will be covered under the universal, under the old age systems, which is a good announcement. We like to see that happening. But with that one, we also see that universal child grant is also a necessity. I think there is scope for realignment of the demography and location with the social spending, and we should see the books and try to realign in terms of demography and also location. And I think also this is time to introduce contributory pension. And there was a lot of discussion. I think Aziz can talk about that. And I think we should do. I think it's almost ready. And we were hoping that it will introduce in this budget, but for some reason it did not introduce in this budget. But I think government should introduce within this fiscal year. The other important issue the government has taken is a very good initiative to pay money through the GDP system. But I think that somehow it is not progressing well. And we should have a target that the GDP coverage should be expanded to 100% during this 8-5-year plan. I think this is doable, and we need to see the political will into this one. The other thing that we can also do is to improve our MLE system, and we should initiate some program during fiscal year 2021. Last point, I think we waste a lot of time already. NSS was introduced in 2015. We are now 6 years ahead. We see very little progress in NSS implementation. I think we should set a time-bound implementation plan for NSS, and majority of that should be implemented in during the 5-year plan. I will stop here.
Many thanks, Professor Bozlo Khandukar. I think it was an excellent presentation. Actually, you highlighted the features of the social protection programs in Bangladesh and the challenges which are even there before the COVID-19 crisis. And during the crisis, I think those challenges have become more and more exposed and more acute. So I think during this crisis time, how we take these issues forward, especially we are glad that we have with us a very important person from the Ministry of Finance, as well as we have researchers from World Bank and also from SANEM and Dhaka University. I think we'd like to hear from them. I also request all the participants, you can type your questions or comments in the chat box. And during the open discussion session, I would also like to give scopes to some of you to speak and to share your views. So please, those who are interested to talk, type your name in the chat box so that I know that whom to give the floor first. So with this, I'd like to now request Ms. Anika Rahman from World Bank to share her views on this presentation as well as on the broader issues, what we have been discussing today. Ms. Anika Rahman, you have 8 to 10 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the presenter for this very good presentation. It was very clear. So how I thought I would start.
One second, just sorry to interrupt. Bozlo, if you could stop the screen sharing, that'd be really great.
Okay.
Yes, please go ahead, Anika Rahman.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to basically start with how the World Bank Group is approaching the whole current situation, and that is that our objective remains to assist countries address this dual challenge. So addressing the immediate impacts of the crisis, but while also keeping the long-term vision in mind. So our response is anchored across 3 pillars. The first one being the relief pillar. So again, like I said, addressing the immediate health, social, economic, financial impact of the crisis. The second is on restructuring, and this generally is as countries start to reopen their economies, as most of the world has done now, and focuses, among other things, on strengthening health systems and also in terms of restoring human capital. And finally, there's the resilient recovery stage, which is building back a more inclusive, sustainable, resilient future in a world that's changed after this pandemic. Because I think we all realize we're most likely never going to go back to how things were. And so these pillars are not absolute, and it's not that or sequential that one starts and the other one ends and the other begins. And rather they inform and interact and reiterate and reinforce each other in a sense. So the reason I wanted to lay out that framework is when you view it through that lens, the pandemic has basically indicated, as you've just said, a significant need for strengthening our social protection delivery system so that they can primarily to continue to respond to the ongoing circumstances, but so that what the good practices and maybe the things that we've leapfrogged on, such as all these technological advancements, if you will. I mean, they were always around, but now we're really making use of a lot of them. That they can be mainstreamed even once we're back into a more normal situation. And that also in future, as and when shocks arrive, and Bangladesh is, as we know, very prone to all kinds of shocks, but every year we know that there will be some kind of a natural shock occurring, so that these systems can then continue to respond to them effectively. So even before the crisis, this current crisis, I mean, the government was taking a whole range of reforms as was laid out, is laid out in its national social security strategy. But what it really calls for now is, and it's got the right reforms in mind, right? What it calls for now is significantly expediting these actions, as the presenter just noted. The NSSS, it's 5 years now that it's been it was formulated, but we really need to see a bit better progress in terms of its implementation. And so, if some of these actions can be achieved, then I think what we'll see there is that these systems can then continue to support the chronically poor and vulnerable in the country. That we can extend support to those who are at risk of falling into poverty. So as the presenter again mentioned, this missing middle. Yes, they're missing, but then they're also very vulnerable to those near the poverty line are very vulnerable to falling into it, below it. But also ensuring that we minimize the loss of human capital by helping to maintain programs that are addressing nutrition and healthcare, education, and unfortunately, as we've seen globally, one of I suppose the unexpected impact of this crisis, or at least the lockdown situation, was the increase in gender-based violence as well. But also that these systems can then, and our programs can then support in both employment retention and restoring lost jobs. So with that context in mind, I wanted to focus basically on three areas, some of which, most of which the presenter has also provided in his recommendations. And the first is on shock responsiveness. So it's essential that the country's regular programs and the programs that are specifically designed to respond to shocks can be scaled up in times of crisis. But as the last slide, or the second to last slide in the presentation noted, I mean, the government announced a relatively large stimulus package. They did address, extending support to many more poor households. But the challenge is actually in identifying these households and making the payments to them. And so this really speaks to the need, and this is something that has been in action even before the crisis, but this crisis is exposing even more so how much we need to harmonize delivery systems across programs, specifically when it comes to identifying of beneficiaries and making transfers. And so we need to ensure that existing programs continue to function, so that they can be expanded. As in the presentation, the chart shows there's many countries who've done both vertical or horizontal expansion, and on both. And so, but if you are able to build upon existing programs, what you do is there's a time saving element. There is a reduction in the administrator's time that he spends in trying to now locate new beneficiaries, or if there's an enrollment process. and so it reduces the risk of exposure to infections, and the adoption of negative coping mechanisms. But and again, as the presentation referred to the National Household Database, I mean, this is a critical element, I think, that that just it needs to happen already. And I wanted to clarify, because I think there's some misconceptions on it, and many of you may know the World Bank is supporting the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics in the development of this database. That this is not just a poverty targeting tool. It's not that, you know, using this, all we use it for is to find the poor. It's a registry that basically would allow social protection, social assistance, any kind of support to go to households according to their needs. And so if it is regularly updated and audited, it can help reassess beneficiary conditions, and then ensure, and it allows us to then maximize the impact, because you're really providing households with the kind of support that they are in need of at that point in time. On the financing side, so I'm still on the shock responsiveness. On the financing side of the equation, what this also means is financing the budget. It needs to be flexible to respond immediately to the needs as they arise. And I think, and I'd like to, also commend the government in the steps that it's taken in terms of repurposing funds. I know it's gone through a process of identifying slow-moving projects, or identifying projects that can be deprioritized at this time, so that it can move these funds into programs and into support that's a more urgent priority at this point. On my the second issue that I wanted to focus on is the payments. Again, as the presenter noted, we need to move to G2P payments much faster. I think we've seen at this time, being able to have access to your funds, whether it's on a mobile phone or through some other form of local agent banking, it's again reducing your exposure to infections and other risks. And of course, it helps reduce administrative redundancies and improve efficiency. But I think what we've overlooked, and I say this because we've experienced it in one of the projects that we are also supporting with the local government division, is what we have not given as much focus to is the cash out procedures. So even in programs that are moving to MFS, to mobile financing financial services, or even programs that have that use more digital means of transfers. We need to build a network of the financial service providers at the local level, which I think, that focus has not been there as much. Because this can both facilitate the whole G2P system, because it closes the loop, but also reduce the costs and risks for beneficiaries when they need the funds. So just to give an example, in the program that I referred to with the local government division, the transfers are being made to beneficiary accounts. What they're not being able to do is access those funds, because it means they have to go out, and they have to go out to possibly an Upazila sub-district level branch. But it's risky at this time, right? And so that's a problem. In the same vein, the very vulnerable, the elderly, the ill, people with disabilities, they in general would face difficulties in traveling to payment points. But at this time, they're even more at risk of contagion. So thinking about how we ensure that they can still receive their money, whether that's home delivery system, whether that's a payment to a proxy. So that aspect of the equation of G2P has to be thought about. It's not just about moving money from treasury to an account. It's about how do you go from the account to the beneficiary's hands directly. And lastly, I wanted to focus on talk about the programming issue. So I said before, kind of readjusting existing programs and expanding them vertically and horizontally in the immediate term is probably the most efficient way forward. But in terms of looking ahead at the medium to longer term, the kind of things that we need to now we've started thinking about, or we need to have better more focus on is one is on extending social protection support to the urban areas. I mean, we know that this is for some time now. I think we've all been discussing that with the rising urbanization rates. We know poverty is the poverty reduction has had in the previous years slowed down in urban areas, and so and we know they're largely underserved by social safety nets. Only 10% of the population in urban areas receive some sort of benefit. And of course, the national lockdown resulted in huge loss of income for the urban poor who are mostly reliant on daily wages. And then you have congested living conditions. Dhaka is one of the hotspots. Any urban area, everywhere we see around the world, it's the urban areas that are hardest hit by the virus. But what it also calls for is an adjusted approach to account for the different features of urban poverty, which are of urban poverty, but also of the lifestyles of people and how one can support them. And so that also means that in order to enhance the resilience of the urban population, you would need to consider scaling up labor market programs, right? So Bangladesh's social protection budget largely focused, as the presenter noted, on social insurance, on social assistance. What we don't have is the promotion agenda and the ladder out of social protection. So in terms of we would recommend, and we recommend scaling up of the labor market programs that focus on economic inclusion of the poor, on entrepreneurship support, and some of this what it entails is basically interventions to address the constraints that the urban poor face, and this may be counseling, mentoring, access to finance. It's never one thing. It's a package of services that they need. And what it does is it offers an exit strategy out of social assistance. I don't think anyone wants to stay on a safety net program. They want to do things for themselves, and they want to be productive. And so especially as the pandemic hopefully soon winds down, that this would allow the working age population to transition back into standing on their own feet again. So that was my side. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ms. Anika Raman. I think you highlighted and also you discussed quite in length some of the very critical issues. And I'm quite sure that presenter Dr. Bozlo Khandekar, he will kind of respond some of the issues you mentioned. One point I thought that is extremely important, as you mentioned at the beginning, that the data issue. Especially we are seeing how challenging it is now when government really wants to expand the social protection program or come up with new program like the cash transfer. And we are seeing the kind of challenge that the government is not actually able to meet the objectives of. I just want to mention that Honorable Prime Minister's intention to send 2,500 taka to 5 million households, and we have seen how difficult it has been because of the listing problem has been problematic. So many institutional challenges in this whole system, and the corruption, definitely, all these things we need to address. So thank you, Ms. Anika. I think it's extremely important points you mentioned. Now I go to our next panelist, Professor Saima Haq Bidisha, Research Director of SANEM and Professor of Economics, Dhaka University. Dr. Bidisha, you have around 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, thanks to Bozlo Khandekar sir. Actually, it was very insightful, and he has covered a lot of issues about the challenges that we are facing at the moment. I would just like to highlight a few points. For example, when we are talking about social protection program, this year I was trying to have a look at the different section of the social protection program, and we have seen that, for example, I may be wrong, but for example, in pension, there are like 23,000 crore taka has been allocated or proposed. For the interest of savings certificate, 6,600 crore taka That has been the allocation. For the commercial bank interest waiver, there has been another 2,000 crore taka allocation. For the stipend program, school stipend program, around 4,000 crore taka allocation. So all of these sectors, all of this allocation, definitely these are required, but whether these are required under the heading of social protection program, that is a question. Especially when we are talking about the interest rate of the savings certificate, the pension program, the school stipend program, commercial banks waiver. So this is one thing that is very important. And I think if we have, like in the social protection program, if we have two broad heading, one is the core social protection program and another is some of the subheading, then at least that will help us to analyze and understand the whole situation better. So that is one suggestion from my side. Secondly, obviously, we have been talking about one important issue, that is the issue of targeting the people. So I think when we are talking about the targeting, one issue is the targeting of those who are the vulnerable, who are the non-poor people, but who have been fallen into poverty due to this pandemic. So in Sanem, we have found that like poverty has sort of like doubled, and we have seen that that has a strong implication when we are talking about like some of the household group, special household group, when we are those household groups which has more number of children. Those are more vulnerable when we are thinking about like who are the new poor here. So this is one thing. And when we are talking about this thing, we should, I would like to highlight about three groups. One group is those people, obviously, who are working in the informal sector. Secondly, those group who are actually those who are returned from urban areas to the rural areas. So the reverse migration trend that we are observing. Thirdly, those people who are staying in the urban slum. So these three groups, as far as I understand, these three groups are most vulnerable when we are talking about like the outcome in terms of the whole program and whole poverty issue. Now the thing is like how we can incorporate these people, and this is exactly what Professor Bozulhok Khondekar was telling, that the missing middle. So I would like to highlight that these three groups must be given special priority. And when we are talking about urban slum, we also have to keep it in mind that around 145 program or 140 program of the social safety net program, maybe 6 or 7 programs are targeted for the urban people, or whether they're urban poor or urban people. And for urban slum, we don't see that amount of significant allocation. And also when we are talking about like the allocation, in terms of the allocation, it is like what I have seen, maybe I'm wrong, but what I have seen, it less than even 1% of the social sector allocation, total allocation. So that is one question, like because of this pandemic, these urban people have been hardly hit. So how we can incorporate them. So and for this, I think we need to think about like the two issues. One is the identification issue. Obviously, when we are talking about the identification issue, we need to have an updated database listing of the people, how we will list it, and how we can reduce the inclusion error, and we can reduce the exclusion error as well. Secondly, the monitoring issue and evaluation and monitoring of the existing program, and how we can exclude those people who have been included here, but who should not be included in this program. So I think it is important. One is the targeting, and second is the monitoring. And the social safety net program and the social welfare division should have some specific project that is targeted towards these type of identification, and what Professor Selim Raihan has rightly pointed out, to have some database of one for the targeting and the second for the monitoring. And so some specific measures, some specific policies and measure and in terms of the some, maybe that can be some sort of sale, that there can be some sort of special project, special program. These are important to have a proper updated listing, so that we can update the list where if there is any sort of falling into the poverty or falling outside or getting outside of the poverty, and obviously the monitoring of the scheme. The third point that I would like to mention is like when we are talking about social safety net program, we must keep it in mind that social safety net program, the final target of the social safety net program will be to make the people self-reliant. So when we are looking at the social safety net program, it seems that it's mostly dedicated towards those people who are extremely vulnerable, extremely poor, and to provide them some sort of support, which is obviously something very positive. But we have to keep it in mind that we have to make them self-reliant, and social safety net program, this sort of thing cannot go on forever. So we have to provide them support in terms of, and for providing them support, one important issue that Ms. Anika has mentioned is about like providing the access to finance. So one critical issue is to access to finance. How to provide them with the access to finance, with information, and with some sort of training program, or some sort of training, or some sort of allocation. So how we will provide these things? So one is the providing them information, providing them access to finance, and thirdly some sort of training program, so that they can be self-resilient. And this is very important, that we need to incorporate in the social safety net program. And there we have seen that there are some budgets, there are some allocation, but I think that should be the final focus. And often we ignore this scheme, and we often try to emphasize more on those aspects which are mostly just to save the vulnerable people for the time being, rather than to provide them lifelong sort of support. And my final point is about like NSSS, and everyone is talking about the NSSS. We know that for NSSS, me and Professor Bozulhok sir, we have also worked on how important NSSS is for especially when we are talking about the very vulnerable group, which is the children. So this is a life cycle based approach, and this is a very standard approach. And at least if we can have this NSSS implemented at this time during COVID, we would be able to utilize the database and utilize the whole scheme for the betterment of the, especially those who are very much vulnerable, especially the children. So this is something I think we have been talking about, this NSSS effective implementation of NSSS for a long time. And it would be really great that during this COVID, the government takes special initiative to expedite the program and expedite the implementation. So I think these were the key points that I wanted to highlight. So I will stop here.
Dr. Samak Vidisha, many thanks for your very, very useful intervention. And I think I'll just want to highlight one particular area which you mentioned very nicely, that it's not only the transfer or the kind of social protection support to the poor people or vulnerable people. We have to think in a kind of more with a kind of longer perspective, like how we help them with other supportive measures. I think in this crisis time, it is extremely important that many of the new poor people, new poor or new vulnerable, I would say, or those who have actually fallen into poverty, and they need the kind of support, social protection support, but they were not poor to begin with. They were kind of, probably they were close to the poverty and income, but they have now during this crisis time, they have lost their capital, they have lost their business, whatever be the size of those businesses. But in order to get them back to the track, or get them back to their livelihood, I think it's extremely important that it's not only the very small scale cash transfer or this kind of food transfer, in-kind transfer under the social protection program. We have to think about the broader kind of labor market intervention and what kind of social protection programs can be there. Whether are we in a place to think about new kind of social protection programs? Whether the existing social protection programs, are they enough to address the current challenges? So with these questions and with the kind of discussion so far, I would now move to our third and final panelist today, Mr. Mohammad Aizul Alam, Additional Secretary, Finance Division, Minister of Finance. I know it has been a very challenging task for him to, in the budget to accommodate these demands, as well as given the fact that the revenue shortfall has been huge in the last fiscal year, as well as this fiscal year is going to be, our projection is that is going to be the same. And how, what is the government thinking process in terms of the current social protection program, in terms of the challenges, and what is the the new ideas which are coming up to address the current challenges. So Aizul Alam bhai, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Selim Raihan. Am I audible?
Yes, of course you are.
Okay. Okay, and many thanks to Dr. Bozul Haq Khondokar for his nice and excellent presentation. In fact, in his presentation, he has brought the inner stories of our social protection programs and the system. In fact, in our country, we not only delivered the social protection programs only to reduce the poverty, but also to achieve some of the social objectives, which I must categorize in the form of promotive work. So our social protection program also achieves some of the promotive functions and also do some transformative work. So those are very important. Our social protection programs are based on historical development. Right after the independence, there was acute crisis in food supply and malnutrition. So we also had very limited access in the rural areas. So there was also deficiency in the rural infrastructure. So combined all these, particularly for the food security and also the rural infrastructure development. So there are a lot of programs developed in early 70s and 80s. And they have actually done very well in terms of achieving the nutritional development and also some of the basic infrastructural change in the rural areas. Now it is only in the late 90s that the majority of the current form of social protection programs emerged, and those have been expanded and enlarged in last 1 or 2 decades. So that is the story. We know that there are a lot of challenges, but the programs have also delivered very brilliant results also. Some of those are actually have come from the Mr. Bozul Haq Khondokar's presentation. The picture in last decade was rosy, as he mentioned. I am very grateful to him. Particularly, we were able to reduce the poverty in a big way. Almost 20 million people was pulled out of poverty in last 10 years. And there are a lot of improvement in terms of our social indicators, particularly the primary health care, the primary education, female education, immunization, and many other cases. All those are also, in many cases, supported or complemented by social protection programs. Not with a very big budget, but with very smaller budgets, but with good policy, we achieve many social economic indicators. And this is well recognized that despite very low level of income, our social advancement is commendable. The challenges that we face in the social protection program are that targeting error or mistargeting. That means the non-poor people are included in the programs. We have many programs which do not actually segregate the poor or non-poor, like this school stipend, female stipend. In most cases, those have the cross-boundary spillover effects. So those are not really targeted only for the poor, but also the middle class. So the targeting error is a big challenge, we understand, and the way to get rid of this challenge is really an important one. National Household Database was one such attempt to get rid of this problem, but still we are waiting for the final publication or release of the data. And we also need the readiness of the implementing agencies for using those data so that we can uh, reduce the errors in targeting. And there is also a big challenge of vulnerability. That is a major issue. Although we succeeded in reducing poverty almost down to 20%, and the extreme poverty reduced almost to 10% or below that, but our people who are vulnerable to poverty was really high. And that was a big area which has become now an issue for us, particularly with the COVID crisis, because the crisis has hit hard not only the poor but also the vulnerable, those who are living very close to the poverty line. So that is one thing. And the second important thing is that most of our social protection programs are related, uh, targeting to the rural areas, and very few are related with the labor market or job issues. As the country is experiencing the demographic dividend era, so the youth bulge, they require a lot of skill development programs and training. Although government is switching over to more and more skill development training so that the benefit of the demographic dividend can be reaped, but still it is in the developing stage. So we have less programs related with the labor market, and that has rightly been pointed out by Mr. Buzlul Haq. We do not have any national pension system or universal pension system. So that is also a gray area where we need to work very quickly. The government decided to introduce an universal pension system in the last fiscal year, 2019-20. But when the policy was at the final stage, in fact, in the month of February, the crisis emerged from COVID, and actually the process stalled. So this is an area particularly related to the labor market, the development of the skill, and also the employability of the youth. Those are important. And our job market is predominantly by the informal work. That is also a very uh, critical area. So the informal workers or informal jobs are hit hard by the COVID. So these people have also become helpless. In many cases, they lost their job or they lost their salary. So these are the crises that we face. And although our social protection programs did deliver good results in the last few years, but scaling up is an issue that was not well designed before. So when the crisis hit, the COVID crisis emerged, so the scale-up facility was not actually available. So that was a big setback for us. And now I come to the stimulus program. The government declared 19 stimulus package totaling almost 1 trillion taka, 103 lakh crore taka, which is in dollar terms $12.1 billion and 3.7% of GDP. Out of 19 programs, we have around 7 programs directly can be categorized under social protection. So we have a good number of programs, and also the allocation is also satisfactory, I must say. In the current fiscal year, the government decided that 100 upazilas, the most poverty hit 100 upazila will be covered under 100% universally poor old age allowance, and also widow allowance, and also other programs. So we have the programs in cash transfer and also in-kind transfer like food transfer, and also building of houses for homeless people. particularly the delivery channel is most important. The presenter as well as panelist has mentioned about the transfer mechanism, particularly G2P. G2P has rolled out, I mean, our target was to make all cash transfer programs under G2P by last June, but it was not possible because of the COVID crisis. But still then, we transferred 10 million electronic fund transfer in the last fiscal year through G2P. And G2P has an advantage of the safe delivery of money to the beneficiary's account. And the beneficiary's account means the account that he or she prefers. It could be mobile financial account or it could be bank account. And it could be anywhere where he has his or her own preference or advantage to receive the money. So the G2P is expanding and we have a plan to cover all cash transfer under G2P within the current fiscal year by next June. And it could be done. Technologically, it is possible. And also there are other issues of financial inclusion, which is also possible through expanding or rolling out G2P. So we are doing that. What I would like to mention that the crisis has actually proved the importance of social protection in a big way. And the government has also declared the stimulus package as well as the other programs also targeting to the poor and vulnerable people. So although in our social protection program list, you may find many programs may not fall under the core program or targeted to the hardcore poor or very poor people, but there are many programs which can be also categorized as a core program. So the fiscal constraint was one issue, as rightfully mentioned by Dr. Selim Raihan. So with the crisis emerged, the fiscal constraint was really a big one. So it was very hard to design too many big programs, but still the crisis is there and the government is working to give relief to the people who are hit hard by the COVID, particularly the informal workers and the poor and the vulnerable people, those who are living in rural and urban areas. So with this, I would like to stop here and would like to hear from others participants. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ajarum Bhai. I think you elaborately pointed out the kind of initiatives taken by the government during this crisis, as well as the challenges you are also facing. It's a kind of crisis still unfolding. And I'm quite sure that you are also facing the kind of the challenges you already mentioned, that these are also kind of a kind of dynamic process that, and in the coming days, how all these things, how you are planning to actually manage all these things, it will be very, very important. Especially on the one side, you have this fiscal constraint, on the other side, growing pressure on spending on the critical areas. And one of the critical areas is, of course, the social protection. And as I mentioned, that it's not only the spending on the current programs, but also expanding or coming up with new programs. So I think this will be extremely challenging. And we have our full kind of support and confidence on you, your finance division, that, definitely we all together will be able to overcome this crisis. So viewers, you have heard from the panelists, from the presenter, we have a kind of now open discussion session. Here we have with us participants from some national and international organizations. I will give them some opportunity to talk for around a couple of minutes, and then we can also go to the other participants. So if I request Mr. Aminul Arifin, UNDP Bangladesh, Arifin Bhai, if you'd like to share your view for a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Ryan Bhai, and thank you, Professor Bazlul Haq, for excellent presentation. I just want to 4 points here. Nicely, actually, you articulated the different issue on social protection. And you also mentioned about exclusion error. But I just wanted to know, let you know that one is, to me, that exclusion error is not a bad project management, but it is by design fault, or based on the design that how many people they will consider in the scheme. So that's why this is the issue over there. If we can compare, see that one Benazir Bhutto slum development program, exclusion error there is a 90%. So, but it is a very good and then a comprehensive program there. That meaning 10% population of that slum are receiving somehow the social benefit. But the big problem, I think, that was the inclusion error, which is more than 40% in Bangladesh. And that actually indicating somehow there is a governance problem there. So that needs to be addressed over there. You mentioned about the pension, and I think the discussion came through in the from the panelists, pension and GDP allocation like that. We actually take Indonesia as one of the notable and good example country for social protection. And our last experience in 2019, we visited there. Indonesia is less than 1% of GDP they allocated for social protection, and pension included over there. But the big issue in Indonesian success is harmonize the program by one agency. That is the major issue over there, and that's why their MIS and then GDP and other thing is performing well. But in Bangladesh case, we are in 35 ministries are involved in somehow directly implementing or coordinating or the fund disbursing, many issues like that. And then recently, I think that jute ministry also include that, meaning 36 ministry, because jute workers, that is, they got the bailout and then provide support from the social protection. I can also refer here is our last conference, Anika, if you can remember that, I think that comes from the World Bank, that 80 to 90% of the government employee belongs to the third and fourth class who receive the pension. And if they don't get this pension, then they may maybe fall into the missing middle class category, something like that. So I think that one is somehow, it mentioned that they are under the pension system and under social protection. So, yeah, and I think Aizul Alam sir is a very long time no see. I'm very much happy to see you over there. I think government is now under process of pension reform. And I am damn sure that future there is a working has been started, and in future you will not most probably not get in the social protection list. Definitely government willing to do that kind of thing. Finally, I can say NSS is a highly ambitious program, the strategy over there. And it involves 35 ministries and divisions. And this is a 10-year strategy. So somehow is mentioned that slow progress and other thing, but internalizing, it took 2 years. That meaning NSS implementation started in 2017. Despite it's the middle June, the cabinet approves, but it took 1.5 years get a bit start over at that one. And if we can see the 15 to 25, then we are now in the middle of it. And I can damn sure that everybody now is talking and thinking in the same pace, same length, and definitely I can say that reform take place and reform get the pace, and then definitely we'll achieve by 2025. And then 2026, most probably we have to build up a new strategy, NSS 26 and onwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arvind Bhai, for sharing your views, which was quite useful. At this stage, may I request Mr. Makonin from UNICEF to share his view for a couple of minutes? If you're there, you have to unmute your microphone.
Thank you very much, Salim, for this opportunity. And
I think we can't hear you. If it can be made a little bit louder.
Hello. Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Yes. Now we can hear you. Great to see you.
Thank you, Professor Raihan and Bazlul Kondokar, for this opportunity, for organizing this opportunity. And I hope you will continue to have this kind of forums in the future to discuss social protection in Bangladesh. I'm with my representative, Mr. Tomo Kuzumi here, and of course, who is also very much fun for, universal social protection in view of large exclusion errors, which leaves out, the neediest from the schemes. That is very much of interest for us in UNICEF and also in the UN family, and also for the country at large. So the exclusion error is not something that is really to be kind of undermined. It is very important, especially in view of leaving no one behind, which is, the principle of SDGs, the fundamental principle of SDGs. So the economic fallout, particularly due to COVID, has severely hit, these groups without social protection. So the whole approach about, vertical and horizontal expansion, as recommended in Bazlul Kondokar's presentation, is very much of interest to us, both as UNICEF and as UN family, especially with regard to the socio-economic recovery framework for COVID, as we work together with government in preparing socio-economic response framework. So we very much kind of push for universal social protection, at least as a temporary measure, for a minimum of like 6 months period to start with, in terms of universalizing. While of course we also understand the argument with regard to fiscal space, affordability issues as a whole. Okay, we have Mr. Azizul Alam from Ministry of Finance. This is also one area of concern for government that is very much appreciated and understood. But at the same time, also, the impact on the neediest, on the most vulnerable, should also be seen in perspective. So we are very much working closely with General Economic Division, Cabinet Division, and other UN agencies, are pushing for this, horizontal expansion and vertical expansion towards gradually to universalism in a life cycle manner. So thank you once again for giving me this opportunity. This is, a short intervention from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Makonnen. I think it was extremely useful, your short intervention. May I at this stage request Mr. Belayat Hossain, HelpAge International, for speaking for a couple of minutes. And also other participants, you can raise your hand or let me know whether you want to talk. So Mr. Belayat Hossain, you are there? You have to unmute your microphone.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me opportunity to say something, because actually I think I should talk, because if we would like to implement SDG, so sir said before, last speaker said about this, like leave no one behind. So I am representing actually elderly people's issue. If we consider the COVID-19, we know that we all well aware about it, that elderly people are severely affected, because most of the, only 30% of the older people, those who are actually directly contributing in economy. So, and mostly in our country, they are working for informal sector. So currently informal sector, we know, they're vastly affected. And most of the elderly people, like every I think 5 people, 4 actually dependent on I think family income, or they are living with family. So they are badly affected because family income reduced. So they affected directly, and their condition is not like others group. So they are actually, they need some to address some non-communicable disease. They have to spend money for non-communicable disease, and in our country this is very expensive, and Currently, actually, so I would like to say that so many ways actually they are vulnerable, this group of people, and only 4% people receive I think government pension. The retired people are getting some pension, and mostly I think receive I think total 69% people actually overall 39% people covered by the social old age allowances. So I think 39% people actually covered it with other pensions. So around 70% actually left behind. So currently, actually, I would like to say that though government declared to address like 100 poorest upazala's poorest people will receive universal social pension, but you know that targeting and exclusion error actually every I think still it will I think it is very difficult to identify who is the financially vulnerable, because we know that the three section of elderly peoples. One is that 60 to 70 is we say that is young old, and middle old 70 to 80, and old 80 to 90. So we can say that young middle old and old, so they are severely impacted, though sometimes they have some resources, they have land, but they cannot access. So this type of actually if we go for universal social pension, it is very good that I think it would be helpful for elderly people for their survival, and their social acceptance will be increased. And another thing is that we know that it is not affordable maybe for government for cover all elderly people, but we can use some example like I am saying for these two Azizul sir is here. So I think this is good. I think good practice. We can capture good practice from Nepal, because Nepal introduced 90 years and above at the very beginning, and now they actually it improved their scheme. 90 years they started 90 years and above all will cover this social universal social pension. Now currently they improve it and it's 75 years. Uh, all elderly people or 75 years they will actually include in this. So we can avoid if we go for this way for considering Bangladesh aspect. If we offer like 80 years and above, then we can above older people, all older people, those who are not getting pension from government. If we offer like this, then I think we can address the errors like targeting error. We can address exclusion error. So we can easily, I think, manage these things. So we can think this way for the purpose of elderly people, because it is very difficult, because all elderly people are somehow vulnerable. So I think it would be good. I think, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for giving me opportunity.
Thank you for sharing. I think it's extremely important. Our elderly population, as also as we are seeing the kind of demographic transition. Of course, as you rightly pointed out, this is extremely important. And during this crisis time, probably it has become more important. I fully support you, the kind of point you made. May I give the floor to Mr. Kazi Faisal bin Shiraz from, he's the country representative of Asia Foundation, for a couple of minutes. Faisal?
Sure, thank you. I really didn't want to be on spotlight. I was on a more like on a learning mission. So I don't know. Thank you, maybe, for putting me in the spotlight. So I'm still in a learning mode. It was a great presentation by Bozlul Khandekar. And of course, Sanem is always very is crucial for having these kind of dialogues and platforms created. So my question is, so for example, yesterday I was having a meeting with some women entrepreneurs, very inspiring and successful characters, but most of them were complaining about how they have been left out in the recent stimulation package that has been oriented towards them. And related to that, we have been hearing again and again that there is a targeting issue. So I haven't been working in Bangladesh for quite a long time. So 10 or 11 years back, I heard the same issue of targeting problems. And 11 years later, I'm here, I'm hearing the same problem. So my question towards, rather than, I don't have any comment or suggestion, so I would really like to learn more, maybe from some of the esteemed colleagues in here, about how we can actually improve on better targeting. Is technology a solution? How are there good examples from other countries that we can bring in into Bangladesh context? Whether it needs to be customized or not, we can discuss. But if there are some similar level of complications that have been overcome through some other countries, those examples would be also very good for me and for my organization to, for example, working on these issues. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Faisal. I think you rightly pointed out that the targeting issue. Probably one solution you are suggesting more on the kind of technical side, and which is extremely important. And the other side is, of course, you and I both we agree that there are political economy side. Even if you can take care of the technical side through technological thing, which is probably the necessary, definitely condition, but the sufficient thing would be to have the kind of political economy mechanism there, so that the targeting or identification is rightly done. Thank you for Faisal. I think you just highlighted a very extremely important point. I think I haven't seen any hand raised, but I have seen some people, some participants actually share their views or questions on the chat box. So I can read out some of these comments. Especially one, there are some questions also. I think one question is for Dr. Bozlo Khondokar. The question is from Mr. Shahabuddin Ahmed. I think he said, "Dear sir, in this presentation, I saw that life cycle deficit is increasing." I hope, Bozlo bhai, you are listening. Bozlo bhai,
I'm listening.
Yes. Oh, okay, great. So, Mr. Shahabuddin Ahmed, he's asking whether, dear sir, in his presentation, I saw that life cycle deficit is increasing, while you know that now we are getting the demographic dividend. So his question is, does the widening gap infer that we have lost or passed the demographic dividend opportunities? That was his question. Then Mr. Engineer Rashid Alam, he asked the question that what types of social protection measures may be feasible for the government to address the missing middle populations to recover their miseries? And he's also asking, and the question is that is government only responsible for the social protection measures? What may be the role of the business community of the country to address the situation? So he's also asking that it's not only the government, but also what is the role of the business community? One question I hear or comment that Jasia from WRB, the question is that around 20 million Bangladeshi migrant workers of both irregular and regular status are working in different countries, and many of them have been severely affected by the coronavirus outbreak. In the last 1 decade or so, Bangladesh government gradually expanded social safety net schemes to cover maximum number of vulnerable people, which somehow inadvertently excluded the migrant workers. Special social security services needed for these migrant families from mainstream social safety net programs. So I think we understood. So, and then keep on saying inclusion of the returned migrant workers, especially the most vulnerable ones, in the National Social Safety Net Programs, NSSP, and allocate necessary budget for providing a monthly allowance similar to living wage for the first few months upon arrival of the most vulnerable returned migrants. And families of current migrants who are critically affected by COVID-19 need to be covered in the NSSP as well. So that was a question. And then I think I also got another question from Mr. Rashidul Alam, that there is a relationship between proper healthcare facilities and poverty. In thereof, nuclear one-man earning a nuclear family, they are mostly vulnerable to the poverty. If they become sick, in one hand, there is a treatment cost, on the other hand, loss of income. Those families fall into a more risky situation if the proper healthcare system is absent within their reach. So he's actually advocating about the better improvement in the healthcare system. So I think you have heard the kind of responses so far collected. So I can go back to the panelists and also to the presenter. Before we hear from our special guest, So, Bozlova, you can prefer to speak towards the end if you want, before we can hear the responses from the panelists as well. So may I go to Ms. Anika Rahman for around 2 to 3 minutes to kind of respond to what you have heard so far?
Yes, thank you. So maybe let me just touch upon the question of the return or the migrants, because I think it's a very important point that was raised. And this is, again, something we are also in discussions with government on. As you may know, many, you're aware that every day, I think almost migrants are coming back to Bangladesh because they either lost their jobs there, or just the policies that those countries are taking at the moment. And as the commenter you mentioned rightly pointed out, these people are generally out of the social protection scheme. One is that they are not necessarily always the very poorest, right? So what we found in our surveys is migrants who go abroad are not from the absolute bottom decile of the population, but they are vulnerable, of course, and what puts them at the risk of falling into poverty is a very high cost of migration. So they do go into significant debt in trying to finance their migration. What is happening now is possibly people are coming back before they could finish their contract. We know it takes generally on average anywhere up to 17 months of working to pay off their debt, the debt that they incur to go abroad. So these people are now absolutely very much so very vulnerable to poverty. There's the health risks, of course, because how they've been living. We see it in the newspaper all the time. There was a recent incident of Malaysia, but we're seeing it for many countries. They have significant health risks. When they come back, they're also there's a stigma almost associated with their return. That are they sick? Are they going to spread? If there's a newcomer back into the community, are they going to spread the disease? So significant support required to the migrant, to the returning migrant. One for the reintegration, because what we at least predict for the very near future is it's going to take a while for global demand to pick up again. So these people, for better or for worse, whether they like it or not, they're going to be here for some time. What do they do during that time? There's some who've picked up skills from their time abroad. There's some who do have some savings and maybe can invest it in setting up a business and regenerating their livelihoods. So very fully agreed with the commenter, with the person who made the comment that I think this is an area that we would need to focus on. The bank is very happy to be engaged with the government specifically on this issue. And so hopefully we'll see some good support going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anika Rahman. Thank you for your intervention. May I now move to Dr. Saima Bidisha for around 3 minutes?
Thank you. I will take two questions. So one question was regarding the healthcare facilities. Now, we know that Bangladesh is a country which has one of the highest in terms of the out-of-pocket expenditure in health. So that is one very crucial issue, and that is making those people, like as the person has asked the question, like those who are like nuclear families, that is making them very much vulnerable when that person becomes sick. So the thing is like, there is no, I think that there cannot be any argument that we need to have much better public healthcare facilities. That is for sure. I think there is no disagreement among any of us that we need much better public healthcare system first. Secondly, like for the private sector, we actually don't see that much of regulations or that much of accountability. So there's an accountability issue when we are talking about the private sector healthcare provision. So there has to be proper guidelines and there has to be proper accountable measures in the private sector healthcare facilities, so that in case of any sort of charging of any sort of expenses, or in terms of the treatment, quality of treatment, they are accountable to some government body. And the thirdly is like we need to slowly think about universal or even if it's not universal, some type of health insurance program. Like it depends like what type of health insurance program we will think about. For example, like in I can give an example, like in Dhaka University, we have for the students, we have a very small scale health insurance program for the students. We have started it. So in the economics department. So like we can start from a very small scale basis, some sort of health insurance program. Maybe later on we can gradually upgrade it, upscale it, and make it more larger. And it can be based on the education institute. It can be based on based on the employment programs. It can be based on the officers, business entities. So that these are the 3 points that I would like to make. And Miss Anika has already talked about the migrants. I would like to talk about a few points about the missing middle and the role of the private sector. I think when we are talking about the role of the private sector, I think we must keep it in mind that private sector is basically they're driven by profit, and there's no harm. That is the natural thing that we see in our open market economy system. So maybe the role of the private sector would be very important in terms of the employment generation schemes. So the social sector, in the social sector program, the employment generation schemes that we have, we can think about engaging the private sector in the employment generating scheme, and the NGOs can work better when we are talking about like the targeting the most vulnerable people. And about the missing middle, we need some sort of insurance, some sort of pension scheme, some sort of employment benefit. It depends like what is achievable and what can be done. So the most important thing, I think one is important for the middle income group. I think important that has been rightly mentioned by Mr. Aziz, that we don't have our employment generation scheme linked to the social safety net program. So some sort of unemployment benefit program, at least for few months, that can be something very important. And for that, we need to have a proper unemployment registry. So this is very important to have a proper unemployment registry. And by that, we can at least target some of the people who are in the vulnerable group or who are in the middle income group. And obviously, in addition to that, like the insurance program, those are also important. So I will stop here.
Many thanks, Dr. Vidisha. Now I move to Mr. Aizul Alam. Aziz Bhai, many things on your plate now. Especially you heard from Dr. Vidisha that we want unemployment benefit as well. And I also endorse her view. So Aziz Bhai, over to you.
Thank you very much. I was listening to the participants' reaction and their comments. In fact, Mr. Aminul Arifin and others spoke about the exclusion and inclusion errors and the probable solution from the technology. These are very crucial. Many countries have actually come out of the exclusion error and inclusion error using efficient technology. And that technology is now available. So we have some preparation for using technology in case of removing inclusion errors. And there are also other preparations, but these were actually stopped or somehow disturbed by the COVID crisis. So there are some progress in the field. And I mentioned that we lack social protection programs, particularly relevant to the labor market. That thing is actually making us some sort of problem. If we had contributory or pension system before, then probably the risks and the fallout could have been registered in some way. And again, as the labor market is dominated by the informal workers with low income, so these are also very good challenges in this case. And particularly, the most important issue is the expatriate workers who are facing difficulties in overseas, and those who have returned back and are not going are not getting job to go back. So the government has one program in the 19 stimulus package. There are some workfare programs, and in particular, particular one workfare program, the government has given 2,000 crore taka for enhancement of self-employment or entrepreneurship through 4 banks, particularly the Employment Creation Bank, Rural Savings Bank, and Expatriate Welfare Bank, and also through the PKSF. So the Expatriate Welfare Bank is provided with 500 crore taka for onward lending to the returnee expatriate workers. And government has also created a big fund for the welfare of the distressed or very vulnerable expatriate workers, either staying in abroad or have come back to home. So there are some programs, and it is important that the government has to take increasingly more and more number of social protection programs targeted with the work, job, skill, and also related with the employment both home and abroad. Also related with their skill upliftment as well as welfare. So these are the very important areas in which the government has started creating new programs in recent years, and we are expecting that there will be more and more programs in coming soon. Since the crisis is still unfolding, and maybe we also need some greater cooperation in the international arena with the support of the IOM and other UN agencies, because we have around 10 million people outside the country. And it is the welfare, it is the better life and also safety and security of them. It also lies with the government as well as also the international community. So a better international cooperation is also urgently needed. So we are working on it. And the last sentence is that actually the crisis has shown us that it is the social protection program that the importance and its urgence has re-emerged globally. And we also feel and give emphasis on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay Alam Bhai. And then I think you again re-emphasized the position of the government, as well as how to address these challenges now and in the future. Thank you for your kind intervention. Before I give the floor to our presenter, Professor Bozlo Khandoka, I just want to check with a few friends from media whether I can see that they are here. If you want to say something, আপনারা যদি কেউ কিছু বলতে চান, feel free. আমরা বাংলা ইংরেজি দুটো মিশিয়ে আমরা করতে পারি। তো আমি এখানে দেখছি যে টিভি থেকে আছেন, দুই একজন আছেন, এবং আমি জানি দুই একজন হয়তো পত্র পত্রিকা থেকেও আছেন। So with permission from our foreign guest, I'm speaking in Bangla. কেউ যদি আছেন, আমরা আপনাদের কোনো প্রশ্ন নিতে পারি। আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে, আমার মনে হয় সেরকম কিছু নেই। So Bozlo bhai, over to you. You have heard many comments from our panelists as well as from the participants. So your response, please.
Yeah, thank you, Selim, and all the panelists, and also the participant who has sent the questions and their comments also. I will talk about one or two issues like the missing middle, how to reach the missing middle. I think Vidisha, Adit, and Anika also talked about it. I think we need to have two-pronged approach. One is that we need to increase the coverage, like how much we can do. We need to see in terms of given our fiscal sustainability issues, fiscal space, and all those issues. That's one way of doing that. On the other side, we need to introduce, I think Bangladesh is now ready to introduce some of the social insurance schemes, like the contributory pension, unemployment insurance, those kind of things. So if we health insurance, if we could do those two together, I think it's possible to cover the missing middle, if not 100%, but we can go a long way towards that. That's fine. I think in terms of business community, we have seen like at the individual level, at the corporate level, some responses, but it may not be that coordinated in terms of like MCCI or the forum. I haven't seen that, but I might be wrong. But in terms of individual, we have seen a lot of, generous, the attempt by the individual business. Some groups in Chittagong were doing fantastic. Some groups in Dhaka were doing excellent work. But there is a lack of coordination possible on the side. But I think most of the business, I mean, like a lot of these business people are also stressed. And in that context, I think government is helping them through web subsidy, interest waiver or deferment of interest payment. And also in some cases, they can come through some other form of support like rent subsidy, working capital subsidy. Some of that are actually on the card in terms of the stimulus package that government has. I think the other issue has been taken care of. The one issue that I will talk in terms of the exclusion error, I think Aziz has said that government is considering it seriously. World Bank is supporting government also. My own take on this one, it is, you might disagree with me. I know that a lot of people will disagree with me, is that the technology will take us somewhat forward. I mean, it can solve some of the problem, 20% problem. The National Household Database can solve the 20% problem. But the 70% exclusion error will not be solved only through technology and using National Household Database. I mean, like, it is not possible. We have seen the example of other countries and the BMT model that World Bank tries to promote. Even in the context of Bangladesh, if you do it with the best BMT model, if you cover only 20% of the people, your exclusion error will be 60%. So we need to increase the coverage. Whether we should acknowledge that and need to cover the participant is a big question. It's a political decision, and it is not only like the decision will be made by the political decision. And I leave it to that at that point. The other issue that I wanted to disagree with, I think I disagree with Anika and also Bidisha in terms of there is no exit from social protection actually. I think if you look at the rich country and the emerging economy and the countries who are pro-people, they are embracing a life cycle approach because the risks are there. Even if you are non-poor, you will have several risks. And in that context, I think we have to embrace more and more people into the social protection system because when the country is becoming richer, the responsibility or the demand from the citizen, from the state will be higher. In that context, there is no exit in that way, but there's a reorientation of the program. We can exit from the poor relief program that we are having now, but we need to embrace the life cycle approach, covering the life cycle reach. And I will not, in terms of the last question, Shahabuddin is one of my students. He was now a teacher in the Southeast University. I will leave that to Tomo. I mean, he's an expert on demographic dividend. He will answer your question. With that, I'd like to thank everyone, Sanem and all the participants, panelists, for your support and participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bozlo Khondokar. I think you tried to cover the questions and the comments, and you left one particular question to our special guest, Mr. Tomo Hozumi, who is the UNICEF representative in Bangladesh. And I'm thankful, and on behalf of Sanem, we are all thankful to him for joining us this program, and we'd like to hear from him his views on this whole issue. So, Mr. Hozumi, over to you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Laiha. First of all, I really would like to express my sincere gratitude to the SANEM, for kindly inviting me to this webinar. As it was well articulated in a very incisive presentation by Professor Khondokar, the COVID-19 had really had a profound impact on the lives of virtually everybody on this planet, which our generation have never experienced. Needless to say, what has been happening globally, including Bangladesh, is nothing but tragic. At the same time, if there's anything that we can benefit from the current crisis situation, it should be that it gives us an opportunity to reflect on the future of the development path that we have been following until now, deeply and seriously, and how we can better address some of the fundamental problems that we have been facing in the course of pandemic over the last several months toward the future. In other words, I believe we should not waste this crisis. In this regard, I really heartily welcome this webinar and the presentation by Professor Kondukar and also many other panelists. Prior to the pandemic, as Professor Kondukar showed, Bangladesh economy has been growing very strong at the macro level over a decade. Also, it made a number of fantastic achievements in terms of social development, as shown by the rapid reduction of child mortality rate, malnutrition rate, substantial increase in access to basic education, among others. At the same time, the level of inequality as measured by Gini coefficient has been rising rapidly and substantially, which, as we all know, is not a good sign in terms of how widely the fruits of economic development are shared and how sustainable the nature of economic development is. Looking more specifically at the country's social protection system, which is the main topic of today's webinar, there are a number of challenges, as Professor Kondukar presented. Among them, and it has already been mentioned by many colleagues, what I personally consider the most serious is a huge exclusion error of the existing social protection schemes, which is 71% on an average. Given that the purpose of these schemes is to reduce poverty and inequality, the fact that more than 2/3 of their target groups are excluded is something that deserves a very serious attention. And I believe that any discussion on the topic of social protection system in Bangladesh need to start with the recognition of this very hard reality. Globally, there has been a growing body of evidence which proves that traditional notion and practice of poverty targeting, quote and unquote, as represented by proxy means test, may look sophisticated, enticing, but does not really work in practice. Whenever the proxy means test is adopted, a majority of poorest and the most deprived end up being excluded. In that sense, the average exclusion error of 71% of the social protection schemes in Bangladesh is not, in fact, an exception, but rather a norm in the world. As strongly emphasized by Professor Kondukar's presentation, we must change this situation. The way to go, to me, is to adopt more universal approach. Whenever the word universal is used, there can be voices of concern on affordability, feasibility, and also cost effectiveness. However, there are a number of examples in the world which show a properly designed and implemented universal schemes is highly cost effective in terms of both reaching the intended beneficiaries and also overall poverty reduction effects. This is a time for us, I believe, to look at the evidence and not caught by pre-existing notion or mindset. Among all the measures that Bangladesh can take with regard to social protection schemes, what I consider as the most important is a universal child grant, hopefully up to 18 years of age, as it has been done in the countries like South Africa and also Mongolia. I say this now not because I am working for UNICEF, but because I truly believe and there's evidence, I truly believe that it will be one of the fundamental determinants of the national development of Bangladesh as a whole over the next several decades. Why is that so? A number of reasons have already been explained by Professor Kondokar, so I won't repeat that. They are all valid. The only point I'd like to add, and that's something which Professor Kondokar sort of encouraged me to mention, is the impact of demographic changes that Bangladesh will go through in the next several decades. Currently, Bangladesh population structure is still young, with roughly 40% of its population under 18 years of age. So that means by international definition, 40% of population of Bangladesh, they are children under 18 years of age. But Bangladesh society is going to age awfully fast in the next few decades. Just for the sake of comparison, it took historically 115 years for France to transit from an aging society to an aged society, historically. 115 years, more than 1 decade. As compared with that, I happen to come from Japan. My country, Japan, which has been known as one of the fastest aging societies in the world, my country took only 24 years to transit from an aging society to an aged society. 115 years France, 24 years Japan. Now for Bangladesh, the country will be taking only 17 years, 17 years to go through the same process. And that is 1/7 of the period that France historically took, and 2/3 of the period that Japan, one of the fastest aging societies in the world, has taken. In fact, Bangladesh is one of the fastest aging societies in the world. Today in Bangladesh, 13 people, 13 people of working age of 15 to 64 years are supporting one older age person aged 65 years and above. 13 versus 1, not a big deal, yeah? In 2040, that is another 20 years from now, only 6 people of working age population need to support one senior dependent, which is half of today's ratio. By 2060, that is another 40 years from now, 3 people of working age will need to support one senior age dependent, which is 1/4 of today's ratio. This is only possible if today's children become 2x, 3x, or even 4x more productive than today's adult by the time they become adult themselves. Even allowing for the possible extension of economically active life period of human being as the longevity generally improves, it is a huge challenge. And a scheme like Universal Child Benefit will be one of the most cost-effective public programs that the country can invest to enhance the development of today's children and the productivity of tomorrow's workforce of the country. Today, I believe Bangladesh as a country is at the crossroad of development. Like many other countries, including my own country, Japan, the COVID-19 pandemic showed us both the progresses our societies made and also the vulnerabilities we still have. I firmly believe that we must come out of this crisis with good, solid lessons and apply them for the betterment of our future. From that perspective, I believe today's webinar was immensely useful. Thank you for your attention.
Many thanks, Mr. Hozumi. It was an excellent deliberation towards the end. Kind of, I think, the analysis you provided, a very short analysis, but very crispy, very succinct and very relevant. I think that really, made this webinar very useful and the discussion. Thank you so much from Sanem. And I don't really dare to summarize the discussion today. It's not possible, but I think that we had an excellent discussion, excellent presentation by Professor Bozlo Khondokar, and excellent discussion by the panelists, and very excellent and important intervention by the participants. And finally, our special guest, Mr. Hozumi. I think it was a very useful event today. So I would like to request Professor Bozlo Khondokar if you want to share any final words before we close the event today.
No, I think I must thank Selim also. He did not get any thanks from us. So I must thank Selim for a wonderful moderation. I mean, you have done excellently well in terms of moderating this event. And my thanks to the panelist, Aziz. He is a very extremely busy person, and he has given time. So we are thankful to him. Anika also very busy at the World Bank, Bidisha, and also all the participants. Every time, all of your time is very important, I understand. And towards the evening, I mean, like this is a family time, but you are actually, I mean, using your family time for this event. So we are thankful to you for the participation. And also my special thanks to Tomo Hazumi, who has, I think, I mean, rightly, I mean, like summarized the whole issue in front of us. That this is up to now. I mean, what should we do? I think Aziz can go back and talk to his seniors that this is what we need in terms of, and if we want to actually help our old elderly, we start investing more on the children. I think there is no alternative. With that, I like to, I would like to hand over to Selim. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bozlo Khondokar. And actually, I'll just echo Professor Khondokar by thanking all of you and for participating and making this program a very successful one. From Sanem, we have been organizing programs like this, and we have our next event on 8th August, where we'll be presenting in front of you findings from a survey of more than 300 firms on the Business Confidence Index. So what we call that, because we know that during this crisis, the firms and the business community, they are suffering quite a lot. So what is their expectation? What is their confidence on different indicators? And there also we'll talk about employment and wage and other issues. So with this, I again thank you all and invite you for the next event of Sanem. And I'll just stop the live stream now. Yes, it's live stream is stopped now. And thank you all again. Aziz Bhai, thank you so much. Anika, thank you so much. And of course, Mr. Hozumi, thank you so much for your time. And all the participants, thank you. সবাইকে অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ।